everybody. Since I'm the moderator, I feel like I have a little bit of power, and I would like to encourage all those that are in tables far away, since this room is a bit big, to please feel free to come closer to us so that we have a little bit of that mid-conversation. So please, if you're farther away, feel free to come closer to us. But that being said, I know some are still serving some food as well too, but welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to all the audience and to our participants and speakers today to the session entitled Advancing Economic Integration, Equitable Employment and Workforce Development. Today, I really have the pleasure and also privilege to be the moderator of this session. But let me first introduce myself. My name is Laura Gonzalez-Murphy. Laura Gonzalez-Murphy. I am the Executive Director of the Office for New Americans, the New York State Office for New Americans. And I also carry another very important hat for the Department of State in New York, which is the Language Access Coordinator. Through its statewide network of community-based providers, ONA, as we like to call ourselves, the Office for New Americans, ONA, assists all New Americans in accessing and navigating a variety of free services and supports their inclusion as an integral part of New York State's diverse cultural fabric. ONA has been an active member of the Board of Directors of the Institute of Immigrant Integration Research and Policy. I always find it a mouthful, but we got it in, since it was launched by Governor Hochul almost 2 years ago. ONA has participated in various initiatives of the Institute, aiming to find new pathways to accelerate and improve the integration of New Americans in the workforce, which represents a primary gateway that facilitates the full integration of immigrants to their new chosen home. Today, in this session, we will discuss and examine the challenges facing many New Americans in securing sustainable employment that fully harness their skills, their certification, licensing, and credentialing, as well as English language proficiency. Our speakers here present will address best practices and promising policies that advance effective labor market participation and leverage immigrants into talent pool. This session also presents encouraging approaches to workforce development and upskilling, as well as monitoring and measuring the economic integration of migrants to ensure the deployment of targeted policy and practice interventions. But prior to introducing our distinguished panelists, I would like to go over some important housekeeping items. This session is scheduled to last about 2 hours. We'd like to dedicate a half hour after that fully to question and answer. So please keep, to the panelists first. Try sticking to the time allotted for you, which is an average of 20 minutes each. But the first presenter, since you're two, you're getting less time, but about 10 minutes each. But I know we've shared that with you before. And also to the audience, please hold your questions to the end. I know there might be a moment that you'll want to quickly stand up and ask, but please hold it so that we can continue with the flow and take advantage of their presentations as well. Another thing that mostly without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first panelist here today, Ariel Handel. She's founder and chief executive officer of New Women New Yorkers. I was telling her earlier that I tend to say New American, but I did good. New Women New Yorkers. And Raquel Sevilla, director of program development, planning, and evaluation from World Education Services Global Talent Bridge. This afternoon, they will both be speaking to us about advancing immigrant employment through group mentoring. So I'll take it away. Please, both of you, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Laura. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today with Raquel Sevilla as well from WES. My name is Ariel Kendall. I'm an immigrant myself. I'm the founder and CEO of New Women New Yorkers. New Women New Yorkers is a New York City-based nonprofit that supports immigrant women in securing quality employment, jobs that align with their skills and their interests. And the focus of our presentation today is our group mentoring program, This is a program that we launched at New Yorkers in the fall of 2022 with the support of two other nonprofit organizations. One of them includes World Education Services, and Raquel will introduce Wes in just a minute. We want to introduce the group mentoring program as an effective model to follow to support the integration of immigrant workers, in our case, immigrant women, job seekers, into the US workforce, and especially in quality jobs that, again, align with their skills and interest. And what you're going to see is that we're going to do something a little bit unconventional. We're going to do a little bit of a back and forth conversations with Raquel. And this really mirrors the way that we've been working on this program together. We've been collaborating with multiple organizations on that program. And I think this is part of what made it successful as well. So Raquel, I'm going to invite you to come back.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here. My name is Raquel, and I'm the Director of Program Development, Planning, and Evaluation at WES, World Education Services. For those of you who are not familiar with WES, we are a nonprofit social enterprise that's dedicated to supporting the educational, economic, and social inclusion of immigrants, refugees, and international students. So really excited to be here to share with you about the group mentoring program. Ariel mentioned the organization JVS Toronto. So that is the organization that developed the program and continues to run it in Toronto, and they've been doing so for a number of years. I've had the privilege of collaborating with them a couple of times now to be able to support immigrant-led organizations in launching the program for their community members. So we first did it in Canada, and then we did it in the US in collaboration with New Yorkers. So our hope is that through our presentation today, you'll have a deeper understanding of what the group mentoring program model is, how it's effective, and to perhaps maybe consider it as a program that you may want to support or maybe even adopt in your communities as you think about ways to support the advancement of immigrant employment. But before we talk about the group mentoring model, we wanted to just take a minute to ground ourselves in the challenges and opportunities that the program seeks to address. So we've heard this already many times in earlier speeches today. Despite the talent shortages that we experience in the labor market in the US, we know that many immigrant and refugee workers continue to be unemployed and underemployed. And this comes at a cost to immigrants. It's a missed opportunity for them to deploy their talent and skills to be able to reach their full potential. It's a missed opportunity for employers who are not able to connect with the talent that they need to fill the needs that they have in the organizations, and for the economy in the tune of $40 billion a year of foregone earnings. And while some barriers to employment faced by immigrants are systemic, such as complex licensing process, a number of the barriers that they face are individual. And we know that to be able to help them succeed in the workforce, we really need to address these barriers. So some of the more common ones that you'll see on the screen are challenges navigating the workforce, particularly in their industry. Another is limited proficiency in the English language that's required in the workplace, as well as limited social capital or networks, which we all know are so critical in being able to access the right kinds of jobs. So while there are programs and services that are available to address these various barriers that we just mentioned, occupation or industry-specific mentoring programs in particular have proven to be particularly beneficial in assisting immigrants in achieving their employment goals sooner. So WES partnered with one of our partners in Canada called the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council. They run a one-on-one mentoring program that's occupation-specific. And part of their program evaluation was to compare the outcomes for people who went through the mentoring program with those who did not. And what they found in that program evaluation was that immigrants who participated in the mentoring program were 2.45 times more likely to be in quality jobs, and they were also 4 times more likely to expand their network within 3 months after completing, or 3 months after completing the program. So really impactful results. And so whether it's a one-on-one mentoring program or a group mentoring program, we know that mentoring programs are really effective in bridging that gap of the skills and education and talent that immigrants bring with those employment opportunities that are available to them. They provide immigrant mentees who are job seekers with space to be able to develop their English language skills as well as their communication skills. It helps them expand their professional networks and also gain that valuable knowledge and approaches and tactics to be able to navigate their way to meaningful employment within their industry or sector of choice. So that's sort of the context, and I'm going to invite Ariel to tell us a little bit more about the benefits of the mentoring program.
So let me just very briefly define what is group mentoring. Group mentoring is when we have a job seeker, an immigrant job seeker in that case, a mentee who connects with a professional, a mentor in their field or industry of interest, but also with a few other mentees through several group meetings. And so there are several features that are very unique to that model. The first one that Raquel already touched on is that it is occupation or industry based. So essentially, the mentoring groups are going to be formed based on a common industry or field of interest that the mentor and the mentees shared. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that really leads to more positive outcomes. The second unique feature is the group format. We're very familiar with one-on-one mentoring programs, but this mentoring program is group-based. And this has tremendous benefits as well. The first one is that it creates additional opportunities for networking for the mentees who connect not only with their mentor, but also with their peer mentees who have similar interests. It also fosters a strong sense of community, which is also really fundamental for the program's success and positive outcomes. So I touched already a little bit on the mentee benefits. The first one, which we really highlighted, is the building of a professional network. Another key benefit for the mentees is the practice of professional English, the practice and building on confidence in communicating in English in their own professional setting. And then the third key benefit is really gaining knowledge and job search strategies that are very specific to their industry or field of interest. So I talked about the mentee benefits, but what is very unique and impactful about the program as well is that it's really built along a two-way approach. We focus on the mentees, but we also always focus on the mentors as well. And the program has big benefits for the mentors. The first obvious one is that mentors have the opportunity to really develop their mentoring and coaching skills. But even more significantly, they really develop a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by the mentees, by these immigrant job seekers. They really learn from their diverse experiences and perspectives, and ultimately they also bring this back to their own workplaces and employers. I'll stop here and I'll pass it on to you, Raquel, to talk about the steps to launch an effective program.
Thank you. So as mentioned earlier, the program that we launched in the US in collaboration with New Yorkers was in 2022, and it was in collaboration with JVS Toronto. And through that experience, we documented 12 steps that are essential to launching a successful group mentoring program. So I'm not going to go through all the steps there. I also will share a resource later that you can actually download and take a look at yourself, and I have some hard copies to give away as well. But I did want to highlight a few of the steps that we feel are really essential. The first, which is step 3, which is assigning a mentoring program coordinator to manage the program. So the success of the program really relies on effective organization and management. And the mentoring program coordinator helps do that. So they help oversee the program. They make sure the mentors and the mentees are prepared, oriented, supported throughout the process. They make sure communication flows very fluidly throughout the program participants, and if necessary, to be able to resolve any conflicts that may arise, as well as connect the mentees to additional resources that may be available through the organization or in the community that could complement what the mentor is offering. The second one is recruit, screen, and selecting mentors and mentees. I think the headline here is that it really takes a lot of time to do this effectively, and it's worthwhile to put up the time up front to effectively outreach and attract the right types of mentors and mentees that can really benefit from participating in this program. And the last step I want to highlight here is steps 5 and 7, which is around orientation of both the mentors and the mentees. It's really critical to be able to set them up at the beginning to really understand what the program goals are, what the roles and responsibilities will be, and the expectations in terms of time commitment and preparation. It's not simply enough to show up at the meetings and engage in the conversation, but the preparation outside of those meetings really helps them maximize the benefit of the time that they have together and the resource that the mentor is able to provide. So Ariel, can you just share a little bit about how you thought through launching the program for your organization, and what are some of the factors that you considered?
So I would say one of the first factors that influenced the way we launched and implemented the program is that it really came within our ecosystem of workforce development. Supplying immigrant women to find quality jobs is at the core of our work. So we really built the group mentoring program as a direct complement of our existing workforce development programs. And that made much easier the recruitment process of mentors and mentees. It was very organic. We brought in mentees who were already part of our community, who had participated in some of our workforce development initiatives. What we did very intentionally is that when we enroll mentees, we not only looked at their industry or field of interest to match them with the appropriate mentors, but we very intentionally decided to prioritize community members who lacked US work experience. Because that's really one of the core challenges, how to get your foot into the door. And we thought they would most benefit from the program. On the mentor side, also very organic process. We were able to leverage our existing network of individual support volunteers. And so we knew our mentors already, they already had prior interactions with our community members. But that being said, still, we had one-on-one conversations with them to set very clear expectations and to really make sure that they were a good fit for the program and that they would also benefit from the program. Because again, you're always going back to this two-way approach to the program. Well, let me introduce briefly the typical cycle of a group mentoring program. The first step is really, once we've recruited our mentors and mentees, the first step is the orientation that Raquel mentioned already as a very important component of the program. Orientation for the mentors, orientation for the mentees. In both cases, it's about setting clear expectations and really providing initial guidelines on how to really benefit from the program. After the orientation, the program really kicks off officially with the program launch, and then we have 5 group meetings of 2 hours. That's the typical format. The program culminates with the graduation or celebration event. But then again, here, I think it's really important as an organization to think about how you want to adjust this to your own community and to their needs. Several things that we introduce flexibility on at Women Yorkers. The first thing, we introduce flexibility for our mentors on the number, duration of meetings. So for example, we had a group focused on the finance industry where we had a mentor, a professional working in the finance industry who simply couldn't block at once 2 hours of her time. It was very challenging. So they decided to have 10 one-hour meetings instead of 5 2-hour meetings. And I think this was also important in a sense because it gave already a taste to our mentees of the very specific work culture and pace of the finance industry. Something else that we introduce flexibility about is the very content of the different meetings. You can see here on this slide, we have a number of topics that were suggested for each of these meetings. But we decided to give flexibility to our mentors to also really adjust the content based on their own skill set and also to meet the needs of their mentees. And in our case, a lot of our mentees had already a strong resume for example, when they joined the group mentoring program. But some of the key challenges were networking and job interviews. So our mentors decided to spend a little bit of more time on these topics. Something that was very interesting as well, we had one mentor who decided to introduce short segments with guest speakers to bring in additional professionals from the same industry or field to share their own expertise and also to provide additional networking opportunities to their participants. So I think, beyond the model that we had and that was very effective, we also introduced our own cultural touch and the community needs. Okay, I want to very quickly talk about challenges and lessons learned. I think I'll really focus on the essential role of the program coordinator. And I want to give a shout out to my colleague there, Talita DiGiorgio, who's done really an amazing work doing that for all of the cycles of the program. The role of the program coordinator is essential really to address ongoing issues, to provide support to mentors. And one of the challenges we had in particular was mentors not always feeling completely comfortable managing group dynamics. And so what we did is we provided them with ongoing support, but we also really try to focus on this aspect more during our orientation session for mentors. Okay, I know our time is over, so I'm going to just move to the impact to highlight this very briefly. We talk about the benefits, but I really wanted to share a couple of personal stories of some of our community members that really highlight that impact. One of our community members, Sarah, from Italy, joined our workforce development programs with really lack of confidence in herself. She was extremely reserved. She was very attentive, but never really contributing with questions and input. And really, she came out of the program with a newfound confidence, especially in really speaking up and in advocating for herself and contributing her ideas. I'll share just another mentee, Lynn from Vietnam, just to talk a little bit of a more tangible outcome. Shortly after completion of the program, she secured her very first job in her field of interest. And just recently, after 1 year in that first job, she secured another position. And in her words, this is really her dream job. It's really exciting to hear this outcome, but I also want to come back to the confidence building because this should not be discounted. It often determines whether an immigrant job seeker is actually able to pursue their professional goals and ultimately secure a job. I'm going to pass this back to you. Yes, okay. So just very quickly, I invite all of you to check this additional resource, the group mentoring guide, which is super helpful resource developed by World Education Services to understand a little bit more about these 12 steps to launch successfully the program. And then, well, if you have questions, please reach out to us. You have my email and Raquel's email here, or just, catch us at the end of this conference and we'll be happy to share a little bit more. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you both, Ariel. And I know it's hard to have so much to discuss and share. So as they said, their contact information is here, but we'll have some Q&A also where they may be able to develop some of their ideas. And I'm going to have to be the first violator of my own rule to say, wait till the comments at the end, but I guess that's the power of being the moderator, right? But there's something I want to acknowledge of being here at UAlbany, where this institute is in terms of the discussion of being, mentoring immigrants and mentoring students in general. I myself, I'm a graduate, a PhD graduate from the University of Albany, and it is here, and I want to recognize that, here that the identification of my working in immigration and where I'm at started and was very supported and mentored by the professors here. Ray, who's not here, he has in another session, but also Dina, and the ability for me to have questions and feel at home. So I wanted to really acknowledge, I felt remiss by not saying that this is where we're at, and mentoring for me was key. So thank you very much for bringing that topic. So I'll move forward now and continue. after violating my own license. So I have the pleasure today of introducing our newest panelist, Ken Silverman, but I think he's going to be joining us online. He's in Japan, so how can we, blame him for doing that? Ken was an immigrant integration fellow at the Institute on Immigration Integration Research and Policy, so part of the team as well. And today, Ken will be speaking to us about overcoming professional protectionism, implications for New York's Empire State Licensing Act from state occupational licensing expansion reforms for immigrants. So I'll pass it away to Ken as soon as we have him join us. We're set? Oh, your mic is muted.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
Oh,
Can you
there
hear
we
me?
go. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Gonzalez-Murphy, and to everyone. And my apologies that I cannot be there in person, but it's great to be with everyone. I should mention, though, that there is a little bit of a subject change in my presentation. It's actually going to be about foreign credential recognition models. The professional protectionism research is a future plan, but I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. So without further ado, I'm gonna share my slides. Hopefully everyone can see this. Yes, can everyone see this? Okay. Okay, here I go. So again, thank you so much. And it's great to be with everyone, even virtually. So my name is Ken Silverman. I'm a PhD.
It's frozen. And your mic is muted again, but you're also frozen. Not there. How about we go to the next? Yep. Let's do that. Ken, I hope you can hear us, maybe through citations on the bottom. We're going to the next speaker and wait for you afterwards. So thank you. Our next panelist is Furkan Yilmaz. I said your name right? Oh, good. Furkan is a program assistant at the State University of New York and City University of New York South Asia Consortium. And today he will be sharing his work about the challenges and integration strategies for Burmese refugees, lessons to learn from the programs that have worked. So vivid example. Thank you all. Passing the floor to you.
Since I will have some time waiting for my presentation, I will first want to start with thanking the Institute and the Center for bringing all of us together. I know we have some familiar faces here throughout the little squares from Zoom. Finally, it is nice to have the opportunity to meet in person. Take your time. Oh. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about the challenges and integration strategies for Burmese refugees. One thing to be know before delving into this matter is I wonder if how many of us in this salon, in this conference room can understand the difference between the asylum seekers, refugees, and immigrants in the United States. The concept is so vague. It has a lot of groups and a lot of social groups as well in the same concept. That's why I believe it's important to have a distinct approach on refugees, as they are one of the most vulnerable groups in the States itself. I will present you my presentation outline first. I will begin my presentation with an overview of the Burmese refugee crisis because it is one of the biggest crises that we have been experiencing nearly like more than 2 decades. Then I will explain the challenges that Burmese refugees particularly face. And then I will talk about the resettlement stakeholders and the policies that we are experiencing in Albany capital region. Then following that, I will explain how other examples like Utica, Buffalo, other places that has like plenty of refugees that are resettled in these cities from Myanmar and how they are succeed. Are they successful? They are being successful. And finally, what can we learn from them? How can we apply these policies in Albany capital region? So to start up with, Myanmar is not a small country, actually. There are more than 50 million, approximately 55 million people living in the country. And as you can see in this map, it's really diverse. And even after the 1948, when the country got their independence from the British colonials, it could not have succeeded its unity. And over the decades, it has been like living multi-ethnic and multi-ethnic challenges going on in the country. The Burmese refugee crisis is rooted in like long-standing ethnic conflicts and political instability in Myanmar. The country has faced decades of ethnic wars, civil wars, military dictatorship, and human rights abuses, particularly against ethnic minorities, such as the Rohingyas, Karenese, Kachin people. These conditions have forced hundreds of thousands to flee their homes and seek refuge in neighboring countries, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, and Malaysia. And since 2005, they started to seek refuge in Europe and the States as well. Refugees often in their religious journeys and following the States in overcrowded camps with limited access to basic necessities. Currently, more than 1.8 million people are internally displaced in Myanmar. And in addition to that, another 1.2 million refugees have fled the neighboring countries and beyond the states, the Western countries, to seek safety and protection under the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees and UNHCR. This positions Myanmar as the 6th largest source of refugees globally. And when we look at the map of Myanmar, we don't see these particular numbers, but there are more than 130 ethnic groups. And most of these ethnic groups has their own language. They live in rural areas. And the rural-urban balance in the country is so diverse. More than 70% of the population live in the rural areas of the country. And the country has, we will see in the next slide, but the country has exclusive education and citizenship policies that is targeting these ethnic minorities. These ethnic minorities are not considered as citizens of Myanmar, and so that these populations do not have access to education or other civil rights in the country. So let me briefly explain how the process is going on in the country. As I mentioned, in 1948, the country became independent from the British junta. And then in 1962, another military coup started the military junta in the country until the 1982 Citizenship Act. This Citizenship Act removed all the minorities like Rohingyas, Karenese, and they excluded them from the population and ignored their existence in the country. And then the famous August 8th protest, August 8th, 1988, democracy protest occurred in the country. And it's brought some kind of promise to the democracy in the country, and there was elections held in 1990. but unfortunately, military did not accept the results of these elections, and then we experienced the first flow of refugees from Myanmar. In late 1990s, the first people that are fighting against military junta, the Karenni peoples, fled the country, and they forced into Thailand to stay there. And unfortunately, it's important to note that Thailand is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention or like 1967 protocol. This means that the Burmese refugees in Thailand are not afforded the international legal protections guaranteed under these frameworks. Consequently, they often live in a state of legal limbo without recognized as a refugee with a limited right to work and move freely or access to education. And like with the efforts of the United Nations, it was possible for these displaced Burmese community to resettle into Europe and the US after 2005, like 2005. Since 2005, Myanmar ranks at the top of the countries of origin for refugees settled in the United States, with 20% of the total refugees settled in the country. And after 2007, there has been another democratic uprising in the country, and there has been some political reforms with the efforts of ASEAN and other international organizations. And there was another period of elections in 2015, but unfortunately, it did not succeed again. In 2017, we started to experience the pressure on the Rohingya people on the western side of the country, and then in 2021 we still experiencing this military junta in Myanmar. And as you will see, 18,000 refugees from Myanmar right now currently settled in the United States since 2005. So what are the challenges faced by Burmese refugees in the United States? Before starting out with these challenges, I want to show you these two photos. If you type in Google Cox's Bazar is a place in Bangladesh, a neighboring country of Myanmar, you will see the picture of seashores on the bottom photo. But if you add another word, refugee, into that search, you will encounter with the photo on the top. It is the refugee camp in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. There are more than 900,000 people now living in these camps, with overcrowded, with no access to education and other human rights and civil rights. So I will approach to these challenges in two aspects. One will be the pre-resettlement process. Resettlement process bring us good data because United States, UNHCR bring us good, valuable data on the refugees that are being resettled in the United States and also being resettled in the other countries in the world. One thing we see there is the low literacy rates in the mother tongue. Like the literacy rates among the Rohingya people, who are the second most common nationality and ethnicity in the States, have like 20% literacy rates. And for Karenni, it's 40%. And for general Burmese population that are seeking refuge in other countries with the resettlement agencies, it is 45%. What we see is like the UNHCR reports that there are 54 different languages spoken in camps, and only 39% of the population that are currently reside in the camps can communicate with the volunteers and the personnel that are working for them in the camps. And also, with a related factor, the access to education in mother tongue is so limited because of the restriction and not being recognized as a citizen of the country in Myanmar. 45% of the whole population in the camps and the people resettled in the States has no access to education, even elementary level. So when it comes to vocational education, what about the job seeking, and what about the employment opportunities that they have? Mostly these people are, as I mentioned, living in rural areas, so that they are having the most majority of them are former farmers, and 21% of the people that are resettled has no experience working in any occasion. And these people are spending majority of their lives, like 4 or 5 years, waiting in camps to be resettled. And also, even the process of resettlement starts, it takes more than 2 years for them to resettle into the United States. And when it comes to the challenge faced by them in the United States, first of all, they are expected to be successful and self-sufficient in 3 months. The government supports for resettled refugees are only last for like 3 months. After that, they are expected to be self-sufficient. They're expected to be living in a house with their families and get adapted to the life in the States. And with the settlement support centers, which is the part of the United States, they reported 61 different languages that are spoken among the Burmese communities. So what we are expecting from these refugee groups is to learn English and get adapted, get integrated into the system. When we check their ESL English course participation and availability in the New York State in particular, it is really very limited. They only have access to them for like 3 months. It's not that the availability is a problem. They don't have time to spend on their education language. They had a dilemma for self-development, in other words. The man of the house mostly spent their time at work, while the women of the house spending their time with children, with childcare. I will present you some numbers of Burmese Americans. Before delving into these numbers, it's important to note that these are not numbers for the refugees. These are the numbers for Burmese Americans, and it includes refugees, migrants, all the people coming from Burmese background. And if you see the education background for this group is so limited compared to other groups in the States. And when we look at the employment rate, they are trying to be part of this community. They are the taxpayers of this community. They are being worked. When we look at the unemployment rate, what we see, that it's similar. But what we see, they are living below the poverty line because they are not making as much as other groups. When we look at their occupation rates, they are not doing white-collar jobs mostly. They are doing blue-collar jobs, and they are doing works with low-paying rates. I will be fast because my time is limited. So when we look at the home ownership, they are not owning homes like the rest of us. Their rate is 45%, while the average is 65% for other Asians and other U.S. Americans, U.S. citizens. And also total personal income for national average is 33%, but they are making 24%, 24,000, and it's almost 30% less than average. One factor affecting is the number of family members of the Burmese families. They have almost 1.5% more than the other communities in the New York, in the States. I will quickly give some insights on the Burmese refugees in the New York State. According to the official reports, since 2012, 8,000 Burmese refugees are resettled in the region. And this number is going up years by years. So there are 5 main topics and 5 different reasons and needs that refugees have in the urban region. The first is the English courses, as I mentioned. There are several organizations that provides English courses. As I mentioned, the availability for them is not a problem for them. The housing, there are organizations that are providing housing. In the capital region, we didn't experience a lot of housing crisis. For employment, as I mentioned, they are being employed, and it's not a problem for them. But the problem for them is their development and their legal status in the States. And fortunately, there are plenty of organizations that are helping out them. When it comes to community integration, we do encounter a lot of organizations that are doing them as well. I will quickly pass that because I want to delve into the success stories as well. So what about Buffalo? Buffalo according to their official report, as I mentioned, the official reports of New York State indicates that there are 8,000 Burmese refugees, but their report says Buffalo is a home to 8,000 to 10,000 refugees from Myanmar. And these numbers indicates that the numbers do not match between different reports, so that we need to have better data on what to do about these communities and how to approach these communities, because like the numbers are not matched and the numbers are, we are not familiar with these specific numbers. And how does Buffalo do that? Buffalo has two of the biggest organizations for one of the two biggest Burmese community organizations. The one is the Burmese Community Services, and the second one is the Caring Society of Buffalo. They have the community organization for refugees, by refugees, and from refugees, and it's their success. And finally, I will briefly touch to Utica. I don't know if you are familiar with Utica. Utica is the city that loves refugees. There are more than 17,000 refugees from more than 40 countries from the world. And their success story centered into the organization that coordinates and brings together all the services that are offered to refugees in the city. I can give you more example if we have any questions in the Q&A. So what can we do better in Albany? There are 5 different things that we encounter in these two cities. The first one is the involvement. They include refugees in the integration system. They want them to be part of the integration system. All the people that are helping newcomers are once refugees. And the second one is the coordination. What we don't see in Albany, unfortunately, is the coordination among these organizations. We do have availability, but it is not in a systemic way. The third one is the representation. We need to know, we need to let the people know about these refugee groups. We need to create awareness. We need to create acknowledgement for these people. And the fourth one, we need to have the follow-up or what is going on with these people? What's going on after 3 months? Because after 3 months, the settlement agency is losing contact with those people who are resettled in New York City. And the last fact that I need to touch on to is the data collection. We do have the data coming from different organizations in different levels, but the numbers do not match. And also when we are approaching into these different groups, they are all different. We need to know that they all have different needs. They all have different backgrounds. If we cannot approach them as a foreign-born people, we cannot approach them as only immigrants. There are immigrants, there are asylum seekers, there are refugees resettled in the system, and they all have their own needs. And I think it's important to understand them. And finally, it's important to create awareness, as I mentioned, by having them in the media. Media has a great role and power to create an awareness for the people living in society and let the society know these people coming from abroad are helpful to the society, and they are a valuable asset to the community, and they are the key to a successful Albany, and it's important. Thank you. I'm sorry for taking a couple of more minutes, but thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you. Do we have Ken now? Or? Okay, Ken, if you can hear me, it feels weird doing this. Please join us. We're ready for you.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Great. Let me just quickly remind Ken Silverman is an immigrant integration fellow at the Institute, and he will be discussing the opportunities with credentialing and skilling issues.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Gonzalez-Murphy, and my apologies to everyone. Such things happen with virtual connections, but hopefully everyone can hear me and see my slide here. And if so, I'm just going to pick up where we left off in the interest of time. Thanks again for having me. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking about migrant de-skilling, which is basically this mismatch that we're seeing as a growing phenomenon around the world, right? And really, you know, if you think about the sort of common trope, it's this image of, you know, a doctor who was trained in their country of origin, who's unable to leverage their skills in the host country and is forced to take on, you know, what's called survival employment, you know, things like becoming a taxi or Uber driver. This trope is now so common that even a movie, a Canadian Indian movie was recently made about it, highly relevant, but very critically unacclaimed, called Dr. Cabby. But basically, the share of international migrants who are college graduates is growing around the world, including in the US, which you can see here. I've circled on this chart on the left, and really the unemployment rates for college-educated foreign-born exceeds that of the native-born in nearly all OECD countries. So it's really a global phenomenon. And really, you know, there are a number of impacts that I wanted to talk about. The first one is the double net loss, right, of human capital, not only for the migrant, but also for the host society, right? The or underemployment of migrants leads to poverty traps, disillusionment with the host society, even alienation. And for the host society itself, it contributes to labor shortages and lost revenues, right? In the US, we see that, you know, migrant de-skilling has led to a loss of 39.4 billion in aggregate annual earnings, right? When we're looking at college-educated immigrants during a 4-year period, 2009 to 2013. In New York State alone, there was a loss of 5 billion in aggregate annual earnings and 594 million in lost tax revenues for the same period, right? So clear economic losses for the host society nationally and locally. And then really there are important downstream effects to keep in mind, right? Employment is an important aspect of numerous domains of integration. It impacts economic independence, housing, stability, social links, language acquisition, and other areas of integration. So, you know, allowing for migrants to utilize their skills, as you can see, is an important facet for a number of important reasons. So I also wanted to talk about how this phenomenon occurs, right? There's sort of 3 main barriers that lead to de-skilling. The first is information asymmetry, right? So what we see is on the demand side, there's an uncertainty of how foreign obtained skills can be transferred, right? In terms of, you know, language and experiences. And then on the supply side, there's uncertainty of how to navigate employment systems for foreign trained high skilled workers, right? Many people, because a lot of the licensing, you know, the process can be so cumbersome, just knowing how to navigate the systems and gain employment can be very challenging. Another important barrier is discrimination, bias, and normative perceptions, right? There's a lot of uncertainty around foreign obtained degrees, right? Many foreign universities are not as well known or recognized, right? So what this often creates is an over-reliance among employers on proxy characteristics to gauge employability. So you see many employers relying on things like race, gender, language, even accents, right? And this impacts employment decisions. And what we see is that foreign educated immigrants are more likely than US educated immigrants to be or underemployed, right? 29% versus 21%. So there really is something about the foreign degree that is creating a disadvantage for high skilled immigrants. And then thirdly is this barrier called professional protectionism. For those who came today hoping to get to hear a talk about professional protectionism, I am mentioning it here, and this is going to be the focus of my future research, but there is this well-established and documented phenomenon of host society professional associations and networks that kind of create this barrier for high-skilled immigrants to penetrate, right? Especially if they didn't go to school with a lot of the people who are, you know, in charge of these associations and networks. Sometimes it's hard to get your foot in the door. Okay, so my research, I kind of categorized I went through many policy models and kind of created three main categories that you can see here. So the first are what are known as bridging programs. These are by far the most common. You have things like training, recertification, credential assessment, right? Many of the people who are at this conference, many of their organizations work in this space. And then there's sort of two key aspects of bridging programs that I wanted to highlight. One is the inclusion of employers themselves through various outreach programs and partner organizations, right? Like including Upperly Global and Offices for New Americans, right? And the other, and this is going to be the subject of my future research, are these barrier reduction reforms, right? There are a number of US states that have been removing certain restrictions, especially around citizenship and status for professional license applications. And New York State is working on the Empire State Licensing Act, although it has been stalled for the past few years. But there are a growing number of efforts at the state level, at least in the US, to try to make it less challenging for high-skilled migrants to obtain professional licenses. Oh, I also wanted to mention that also immigrants are overrepresented among New York State's workforce, right? Immigrants are 27% of the New York State workforce, despite being 22% of the population. And given the shortages in healthcare that we learned about through the pandemic, right, as well as education, there's a growing demand for workers in New York and elsewhere for people who have bilingual skills. And not to mention the fact that New York State is also experiencing one of the largest population losses since the pandemic, right? So the Empire State Licensing Act could help in many ways. The second category is pre-migration programs. These generally involve training and skills transferability before the migrant arrives in the receiving country. Oftentimes, this includes a transition of people who arrive with international student visas who can then get visas for employment. And then the third one is what's known as mutual recognition agreements, or MRAs. These are typically conducted between governments or regulatory bodies across countries. And the goal is to create a mutual recognition of foreign degrees so that migrant skills don't have to be assessed on an individual basis, and in which case you disincentivize, things like discrimination and bias in judging migrant skills. So I've also, kind of categorized the various pros and cons. I won't go over each of these in the interest of time, but just sort of to highlight sort of the important points. For example, with bridging programs, some of the pros is that you don't need to negotiate with other governments or wait for national governments to take action. A lot of these programs can be done unilaterally at the state or even local levels. The con, of course, is that sometimes they're not well funded, right? And sometimes even the assessment process itself can have prejudice. Pre-migration programs are known, research has shown that they decrease welfare dependence, right? Because the migrant in theory already has work waiting for them or has a sort of prearranged work set up. But they can often be exploitative, right? Especially when you have, coordination between sort of global South countries and global North countries. And sometimes they do require bilateral coordination. And MRAs, would be ideal because they do eliminate these sort of qualification assessments based on individual or proxy characteristics. But it is very, very difficult to negotiate these, right? It can be a very drawn out process. So it can take many, many years to establish MRAs. So on to challenges and recommendations. Some of the ongoing challenges that we're seeing in the literature, the perception of global South universities, right? Even though we're seeing a globalization of, tertiary education, right? Growing numbers of people in the global South are getting, degrees from universities, but we're not always seeing these universities recognized in the same way, right? If you, for example, you take the QS World University Rankings, which is a very commonly used ranking system, only 4 Global South universities are in the top 100, right? Another challenge is that refugee resettlement policies often mandate economic independence. So this oftentimes incentivizes migrants to seek out so-called survival employment just to, get by, and oftentimes without being able to leverage their skills. And we still see latent biases in promotions to senior level positions, especially for Black and women immigrants, right? So even if you get your foot in the door, even if you get employed, getting promoted, to supervisory or senior level roles, we're still seeing a divergence there among migrants. And then, of course, the entry into many fields still requires licenses with, things like citizenship and status restrictions. So these are sort of 4 main challenges. Some recommendations that I would offer. There is a UNESCO Global Convention on the recognition of qualifications concerning higher education. It is new. And, it may take a while for this to catch on. I don't believe the US has ratified it yet, but it is a way for countries to begin to recognize each other's higher educational degrees. That would be a good place to start. Many people I talked to said it's important to continue to include employers and regulatory bodies in future policymaking, because ultimately it's going to be employers and these bodies who are making decisions about hiring and licenses. And when national governments are slow or fail to act, it's important for local and state governments to know that they can pursue their own agreements, right, at the state level. They don't have to wait for national governments that may be mired in partisan gridlock and so forth. We've also heard that on the demand side, on the supply side, that it would be very helpful for US states for each state to sort of create a one-stop user-friendly online information source, right? Because a lot of the information is so fragmented, it can be very difficult to even know what is required for someone who is, a doctor or an accountant trained in another country to become a doctor or an accountant in the US. So if each state could sort of streamline that process, that would be very helpful. And then, of course, as I've been mentioning, right, the Empire State Licensing Act, if a future New York State legislative session could pass that would go a long ways towards helping out in New York State. These are my sources. And then I just very quickly, for those who came to hear about the Overcoming Professional Protectionism research, this is a future plan. So basically what I'm hoping to do is looking at some of the state laws that have been passed, where they're basically using taxpayer ID numbers in lieu of Social Security numbers, right? So people who don't have Social Security numbers will still be able to get professional licenses, right? This is a growing movement across the country. Problem is, in New York State, right, where immigrants are overrepresented among the workforce and there's this growing need, we still don't have a similar law. So my question is, why have these other states been able to pass these reforms, right? These professional licensing expansion reforms that eliminate citizenship and status requirements. Why not yet in New York? So that's what I'm now working on, IRB approval to do this. So my goal is to analyze the political conditions under which state legislation has been passed, and looking at, sort of the policy window opening. If those who are familiar with the multiple streams framework, that's kind of what I'm going to be using. And I'm going to be purposely limiting my scope to Democratic dominated state legislatures because I want to sort of exclude partisan gridlock as a factor as much as possible, although it, of course, even if a state legislature is majority Democratic, it doesn't mean there isn't that issue. But I wanted to really look at this issue of professional protectionism, right? And why some groups, as we've seen, are sort of hesitant to allow these changes to go through in certain states. So I'm going to be doing interviews with public officials, experts, other stakeholders in 3 Democratic-controlled states, or legislatures where Democrats control the majority, Illinois, Nevada, and Oregon. All three of these states have passed these types of measures where they're allowing tax ID numbers instead of Social Security numbers. So that is my future plan, and I know I'm close to my time, so I will stop there. But again, thank you so much for your attention, and I apologize for the earlier connection problems. And back to you, Dr. Gonzalez-Murphy.
Thank you, Ken, and stay, hopefully you can join us later for the Q&A. I'm sure that there'll be a few questions for you as well. But last and definitely not least, we have Ji-Sung Kim. Did I say your name correctly? Ji-Sung Kim, good. I always find that to be important. So Ji-Sung is a senior research associate at the Center for Women in Government and Civil Society at the University at Albany. He will be speaking to us about measuring economic integration. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lauda. I know I have an important mission to get things done on time so we can talk about wonderful presentations we had. But 안녕하세요. 여러분들 만나서 반갑습니다. Good afternoon. It's really nice to meet you guys over here. So that was me speaking Korean, which is the language about 60,000 New Yorkers speak. And my name is Ji-Sung Kim, and I work with Dina as a senior research associate at the Center for Women in Government and Civil Society, and also as a research fellow at the Institute. And I'm excited to share what our team has been working on for over the past year, Immigrant Integration Data Gateway. So the objective of this presentation is twofold: officially unveiling the Immigrant Integration Data Gateway for the first time, and share the findings and takeaways from the data analysis conducted as a process of building the data gateway. As you see here, we'll go over the motivation that drove the project, the research questions that refine the structure of the data gateway, and the methodology used to build the data gateway. And then we'll take our tour of the Immigrant Integration Data Gateway, exploring the different contents available on the website. Our findings and takeaways will be shared shortly after, and then I will conclude my presentation. So the motivation behind this initiative is clear. We wanted to evaluate how well New York State is doing with immigrant integration so that we could assess the extent of integration of foreign-born New Yorkers into the economic, social, and political fabric of their communities. We wanted a tool that allows us comparison across New York State so we could provide consistent analysis comparing immigrants with native-born counterparts across New York State. Also, there was need for mapping and visualization so we better understand what we know from the data already available. And finally, and most importantly, we need to develop a tool specific to New York State that offers a unique resource specific to New York State, detailed to the county level for policymakers and stakeholders to address the disparities. So the Data Gateway initiative was guided and further refined by these research questions. The initiative was essentially an effort to understand the impact of immigrants' native status. We wanted to answer if the American dream is alive for immigrants who come to our shores, and under what conditions does the impact of the outsider status become negligible, and to what extent can immigrants enjoy the equal access to the economic opportunity as their native counterparts. And more research questions followed. We wanted to understand the impacts of race, ethnicity, gender, and their intersections with nativity status, the effects of English proficiency and educational attainment in shaping their economic outcomes as we refine the structure of the data gateway as we built it. . To answer our research questions, to understand how well we are doing with immigrant integration or how well immigrants are faring in New York State, we developed a standardized scoring scheme focusing on 7 major economic outcomes of foreign-born New Yorkers. And these outcomes include their total personal income and the percentage of people under poverty, percentage of people unemployed, percentage of people working full-time, and percentage of working poor at the individual level, and at the household level, the percentage of home owning household and percentage of household under rent burden. We use the American Community Survey, a 1-year public use microdata sample for the last 10 years from 2012 to 21, collected and managed by the US Census, and compared trends over this period in economic outcomes at the regional and county levels. So now it's our time to take a tour of the data gateway. And I'll need to use it. Smooth transition as I expected. Yeah, so we are all good here. And as you can see, this is the main page of the immigrant integration data gateway. And on the left side, you see different topics. And under economy integration, you see different comparisons, effects of native status, effects of race, gender, and we also looked into the effect of intersectionality between nativity and race, gender, and all of them. And also we compared the most vulnerable population with limited English proficiency and educational background, less than high school diploma. And once you click one of these, it'll take you to a series of dashboards. Yes. Okay. So as you can see, total personal income. Oh, okay. So this one looks into the effects of native status on economic outcomes, comparison of economic outcome of foreign-born New Yorkers and their native-born counterparts. So under this section, we have total personal income for people in poverty, unemployment, and full-time worker, working poor, home owning household, and rent burdened household. So I'll just go to one of these dashboards and see how you can play with this. So basically, this dashboard shows you the difference between the percentage of people in poverty between foreign-born and native-born New Yorkers. And this is 2021. And you can go back time to like 2020 to 2012, and you see how pictures are different in general. And you can also zoom into let's say capital region. And there you go. So now you see how things are. So all Schenectady is doing relatively well among these counties in capital region, while Warren and Washington County, they're doing relatively worse. Also, you can just zoom into specific county, and also you can change the level of education and see how things are changing as you move around different levels of education. And also, it's not just that, you can also choose to see trends. And this shows the 5 boroughs of New York City, and you can see how things have been fluctuating over time. And you can also do the same thing, change the educational level to see how things change. And also you can move on to different regions, Nassau and Suffolk counties. And also based on this scores, so we know the difference, and based on those difference, sorry. So based on this difference we got from the data, so we measured how far they diverge from the New York State average, and we turned them into standard score and create an index based on it. So if you go to immigrant integration index here, that you'll see these bar charts showing them how far they are from New York State average. And you can also change years to see how things were in the past. And you can also change educational levels to see how things can be different. And you can also zoom into the county level, but there were limited data available, so there might be some missing data. And lastly, we also tried to put the infrastructures for immigrant services on the map of New York State. So legal services, English language learning programs, workforce development, business support services, community-based organizations, and other services. So I'll just go into one of them. So we put things on the map so you can look up based on your address and what they're available nearby. And that is the idea of understanding this. So it's work in progress, and we are trying to understand the gap between supply and demand. But this is the starting point, and we put everything on the map like this. And I'll go back to my slide. And here are some of the findings and takeaways that stood out. So Central New York ranked last in 2021 for all groups examined. phenomenon that warrants the investigation of the reasons immigrants group on all sides of the spectrum do not fare well in the region. But on the contrary, Western New York emerges as a region where immigrants, New Yorkers on the low end of the language and education spectrum fare well compared to their counterparts on the high end of the same spectrum. The region ranked second to last in integration immigration, integrating immigrants who are the low and high ends of the language proficiency and education, respectively. So overall, the findings reveal that performance regarding immigrant integration has fluctuated over the last 10 years with few exceptions. And in many regions, the performance curve dips below state average within that time of period. This may point to the difficulty in maintaining a consistent performance in integrating immigrants, and further studies recommended to understand if there's other macro or micro level forces are at play. And when focusing more on the intersectionality, findings reveal that foreign-born of color in Central New York, New York City, Western New York consistently recorded below state average in the last 10 years, showing disparities. On the contrary, Long Island and Mid-Hudson consistently recorded above state average for this group of immigrants. And further analysis is recommended to identify forces at play other than English proficiency and education attainment as we control for those in this comparison. But still we see the disparities. And also a mixed picture emerges when we examine regional outcomes in 2019 and 2020 at the height of the COVID pandemic, of course. We also need to understand how crises like the COVID pandemic widened the gap between well and poor performing regions and what factors contribute to this phenomenon. And instead of going back to what I just presented and summarize them, I want to conclude my presentation by stressing the significance and promises of the data gateway we unveiled today. So informed policymaking. The data gateway provides policymakers with detailed region-specific data to make informed decisions and enhance resource allocation. By mapping and visualizing data, the data gateway helps identify gaps in service and resources and increase transparency and accountability. And it offers a transparent performance platform for tracking integration progress over time. And it also provides support for community-based organizations by providing community organizations with valuable data to tailor their programs and services. And it also facilitates collaborations that encourage different stakeholders to get together, including government agencies and nonprofits and educational institutes to make things better. So by utilizing the data gateway, stakeholders can work toward creating more inclusive and equitable environment for all residents in New York State. I hope this tool plays a crucial role in the future.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you to our great panelists and to also to Ken. Hopefully we can still connect with you for the wonderful presentations, very stimulating presentations, which really highlighted to us the importance of supporting through mentoring our new Americans if we want to welcome and become a more integrative state, and how we can expand opportunities by addressing and identifying system barriers such as credentialing and licensing issues. And to be able to address such barriers, we see how important it is to understand how well we're doing so far, where our needs at, as Ji-Sung outlined for us with the integration index, right? But also I find it very important for us to understand the whole picture, the holistic picture of integration for New York State, to have seen it and visualized it in a demographic group as the Burmese example. I think that all of the pieces kind of fit perfectly for us to understand the comprehensiveness of integration and how we need need to look at it all holistically, right? It's not just about integrating economically, integrating socially. It's all together on the well-being of our state. So with that summary, I really appreciate the presentation and how well it came together. And I'd like to pass it on now to our audience for questions, any that you might have. We have two microphones on the side. Please feel free to come up and introduce yourself with your question. And if you do know who would be the person that you're addressing the question to, unless it's a general, please share it with us too while you're at the microphone, and identify who you are addressing the question. But first of all, say your name. Appreciate it. Anyone want to say me first? Great, thank you.
Hi, thank you to all of our panelists. This was really great. My name is Ansley Hobbs. I work with the CUNY School of Public Health. I'm the project officer for our Center for Immigrant, Refugee, and Global Health. It's always a mouthful. And first of all, I would love to be able to work across CUNY and SUNY with the Institute. The work that you all have been doing is something we've been following for years. But I specifically have a question for Ken. I'm also a PhD student. I'm working on, my dissertation is on the psychological impacts of labor market integration policies from state to state. So Ken, I was wondering if the policy data set that you looked at, if that was at a national level or at an international level, and also if it would be something that you could share to further the research that we're doing at our center.
Sure. Yeah, I'm also eager to network with others across CUNY and SUNY. So yeah, thank you for listening and for your question. There wasn't really a specific data set that I was using. I was kind of, I mean, this could become a data set, I suppose. It was based a lot on, research that was done at the Migration Policy Institute, but also through, various interviews. But yeah, I would be more than happy, to coordinate with you, to share, what I was finding. So yeah, I mean, a lot of this is also, policies that are being undertaken in other countries. Canada and Australia are pretty advanced in some of these domains, and in some cases more than the US. So a lot of this was looking at policies that are being, that have been pursued there, that I've also found through various sources, and again, through the interviews that I was doing. But yeah, if there's a way, if you want, if you can send me your email, I'd be more than happy to coordinate.
Thank you. Anyone else? Another question? Yep.
Hello, my name is Jorge Montalvo. I started the Office for New Americans 10 years ago.
12.
It's been a bit. It's something that occurred to me, and I think Rivka, you've heard me speak about this too a while back at the Institute. This movement, even back then, of how the courts and how our country is looking at the role of state, local, and federal government. And I'd always said that the federal government does immigration policy, setting rules and regulations saying who can be or not be in this country. And then the states and local governments do immigrant policy focused on people. And if you take that example of like the role of the state, how the Supreme Court views state issues versus federal issues, I come back into thinking of the concept of immigration and refugees in particular, especially with the Burmese example and the data not matching up. I come back to this movement of the secondary migration. After someone settled in a community, there are communities now all across the country and some that are known to be more welcoming than others. And in a time when we have a fractured country where things are coming, laws and regulations, things are coming back to the state, I was wondering what your take was generally, since you guys are knee deep in this these days, and about an opportunity that New York or other states can take if they were to portray themselves as the economic welcoming place, bring people into the economic mainstream, and use that almost as a manner of suggesting a secondary migration. Once we settled in one place, then even more hostile. And having people come here as a driver of economic force, mobility, and filling these jobs we were talking about earlier that can be filled and starting new businesses and things. Is that I thought there was something there, and it just seems like there might be something now. But again, you guys on the ground every day, like, does that seem like that is an opportunity for New York, or is that something you think that because of the fractured nature and how people generally resettle and stay in the community, that people would be willing to stay where they are, even if in hostile territory?
Anyone would like to take that question? Okay, Furkan.
First of all, thank you for your question. That was a great question because this is one of the aspects I didn't have the time to touch on to. Yes, secondary migration, it's a great importance because, like, you know, there is a concept of migrant and refugee community organizations, and I don't know if you remember the data I shared, but there's an important data on small business ownership and business ownership. Unfortunately, this data in Albany was somewhat problematic because, like, especially for the Burmese population, it's like limited. But when we look at the great example of Chobani, an immigrant-led organization, immigrant company, and 35% of their employees are immigrants and mostly refugees. Looking at other states that are mostly coming to other, especially for Burmese perspective, as I can delve into the details of that, like Texas, Indianapolis, and New York, the top 3 host communities that are like the refugees are getting together there. Especially when you look at the data that I shared regarding Buffalo, like the organizations there helping other people and understanding other people that are sharing the core ethnicity, they are sharing the same language, they are sharing the similar background, they understand their needs. That's why if you know there's an opportunity that you can work for, you can dedicate yourself for, with a better outcome, of course, the other people tend to move into these places. I believe there's a huge potential in Albany capital region to success in this matter as well, because there are limited number of immigrant organizations, limited number of business owners that are coming from like refugee backgrounds. But if we increase that numbers, we will see the tendency of refugees to work with these organizations, these businesses, because like most of the refugees that are coming to the States are working either with refugees that came prior to them in the city, and when they struggle in a city and they look for other opportunities that are available for them. That's why Indiana and like New York, Buffalo, Utica, they became the like attractive points for refugees that are coming from these states.
It was a broad question. Anyone else would like to respond, or we're good to the next? That's great. Very good question. You know, I could go on and share more, but I want to give some information, you know, the chance to the audience as well. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
For the next program. Is there a specific curriculum that you have developed for each of the touch points? And it seems that you also rely on mentors from each of the industries. How are they matched with the mentees? Are the mentees, do the mentees share characteristics in terms of the industries that they want to work on?
Questions on my audience. No, that's all right. So basically, the question, if you could go a little bit into depth about the curriculum of the mentee program that you have, and whether the characteristics, right, that the mentor versus the mentee, what are the similarities? Did I get that?
Thank you. Thank you so much for your question. So one thing I didn't mention, after the orientation session, mentors and mentees are going to receive a handbook, a toolkit, which delves a little bit more into how to facilitate the different meetings, these 5 meetings that we spoke about. And they provide really guidelines on the key topics and resources that can be shared. But that being said, we really rely also on our mentors to bring their own industry-specific expertise and to really tailor. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a curriculum, it's really more of a toolkit handbook, and then to really tailor the content of their meetings to the needs of their mentees. And I think this is also what is very unique about the program. It's not only about, it's not job readiness training only. It's really about having this very holistic approach where there is a space created for networking, for also building a community of support around the mentees, and also for practicing and learning and practicing professional English. So I think this is also what makes the program impactful beyond the topics that were being covered. And the second question was about the matching process, right? Which is really a very important component of the mentoring program. You need to be very thoughtful in the way you match mentors and mentees. And it was actually one of the big lessons learned for us at Women Yorkers to start with the mentors, actually. So we started by identifying mentors. We looked a little bit at our data, obviously, like really looking at our latest cohorts, identifying what are the key industries and fields of interest that we have among our community, and then starting doing that outreach to enroll mentors. But it's really important first to identify the mentors and then to enroll the mentees with that commonality. We have an industry or a field of expertise of the mentor, and then we enroll a group of mentees with similar interest, with an interest in that industry. Just to give you an example, actually now we just have 2 new groups of the mentoring program that are being launched. The first one is focused on the nonprofit industry, right? And then we started also looking not only at industries, but also at roles and fields, because I think this is something important. So the second group is project management. And so there we actually have mentees who are interested in project management roles, but it can be any industry. So we'll see. That's going to be a first for us. So we'll see how that works out as well. But thank you. I don't know if you want to add anything, Raquel, to this. No? Okay.
Anyone else? Awesome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Butterworth. I'm the Executive Director of RISE, Refugee and Immigrant Support Services, based here in Albany. I have a couple of comments and a couple of questions for a number of you. So, but first off, this new tool that Jisung, you introduced, I am so excited. I have been dreaming about this tool for years, and I know what I'm doing this weekend. Digging through that data. So thank you. I also, I was really excited about the group mentoring work that you all are doing. I think my organization might be doing something similar. So I'm really excited to see the curricula. I am particularly interested in how you're overcoming barriers, both on the individual side, transportation, childcare, cultural norms around working outside the home. And then also the structural barriers, in particular with employers who might be reticent to make accommodations or changes to their onboarding or HR practices to be accommodating to newcomers. The other, one other piece, Mr. Yilmaz, I think I do want to recharacterize something that you shared. I think there is quite a bit of coordination that is happening in the capital region among immigrant serving organizations. One of the struggles that we have is that there are not enough of us, and we don't have enough resources to handle the increasing demand. Which leads me to my question for you, Dr. Gonzalez-Murphy. If there are regulatory changes that can happen short of legislative policy change, where there can be some cross-agency collaboration, particularly around re-credentialing or upskilling, that really could push the dial and make some change on a shorter time scale than we would be waiting for the legislature. So that's all of you. Thank you.
I'll try to tackle the last one since I'm here and standing on it first, and then I'll pass it on to others. But yes, I also agree on the index rate. It's fascinating to see. And I'm curious also to how it'll fit into policy informing for state workers as well, right? Like me. But going back to your question, it is to every state. And I think here, Wes, anything that you want to jump into that question as well as the World Education Services credentialing information, right, in organization is every state has the jurisdiction in many of these credentialing and licensing. It is not regulated in many ways as to, how we evaluate the education of someone that was educated abroad, has the skills, and not just higher skill, right? I don't like the word high skill usually because an agricultural worker is high skilled. So in general, right, it's about what empowerment we have gained in another country that we want to give it the equal value to get employment here. So in those terms, it is a state regulated in most of the positions, right? There's few. And we can see how some states have advanced more than others. We struggle in New York within certain licensure. So I see your point about, is there a regulatory? And a lot of it depends on the profession. You can't, doing a blanket for New York State is not feasible. It's also even with doctors are different than the nurses, than pharmacists and dentists and so on. So one of the things that my office, at least when seeing that challenge, has done is to find ways and learn from other states as well, right? Guides to provide to the information. We know Michigan has a very valuable work with Wes to create that, evaluating those options that we can have here, informing as well those that are making the decisions. COVID had a lot to play and showed us how important it is to license doctors, for example. It's a very complicated field. So we've started in New York State with alternative programs like our professional pathways, where with the support of Upwardly Global, for example, and our not-for-profits, we have job coaches that are going across the state to try to evaluate their credentials, get them going into the path of where they can get employment in the area that they chose to study, right? It's the area that they loved. So at least close to it or eventually become certified. So that's one way around the pathway. Regulatory wise, it's informing, right, that in where we have room, as like the state legislature right now is evaluating options currently. In New York, it is a little bit more complicated, I think, because of those professional issues that were raised earlier in terms of like Ken, on the protectionism, right? There's all of that. However, learning from other states is one of the roles that my office has tried to engage with and create programs on the side like professional pathways. And we're happy to share with you that one through job coaches. A lot of the immigration regulations are also like, getting attorneys to be able to get to the working pieces of that. Our office also tries to address that. So it's not an easy answer. It's very complicated, but part of what we try to do is look at alternative ways. Anyone else on that?
Yeah, so about the dashboard you saw, I was very excited to have that online as much as you guys did, but unfortunately, I have to say it's not flawless. I know with all these promises they hold, this dashboard is only as good as the quality of data it used. And I hear this story, just too often. I hear my people working in nonprofits saying we have data, this data, that data. We don't have people to organize data. We don't have capacity to look into it. There are people coming in, but we cannot just handle that. It's just stick a file on the desk. And well, I said this in the interview too, but I think we really need to do something, statewide initiative to start collecting data on people so we can help local governments and stakeholders better and policymakers can make better decisions. I mean, if we don't know about this, thousands of people undocumented, which are not in the dashboard, and what are you going to do to help them? So I think we definitely should start working on those statewide initiatives to have better data collection.
I love your multifaceted questions and comments. All of us get a chance to speak. I did want to touch on the piece around the structural barriers. And I think, especially with different people that have a different role to play in this room, I think it really highlights for me the importance of the roles that each of our organizations play, be as government, community agencies, credential evaluation services, et cetera. So I think some of the ways that we look at it at WES in terms of the work that we do, we know we're one player amongst many that needs to collaborate. So for example, on the licensing issues, we do try to showcase, share best practices across states so that states don't have to reinvent the wheel and can take what's working in other states to advance, to open pathways for licensed professions. But we also like to think about it in the context of, well, what does that mean in terms of implementation? Because policy change is a big and important step. But until you make that all the way through to the implementation of what does that mean in terms of, do we need some bridging programs to upskill people to bridge the knowledge gaps that they have without having them to repeat things that they don't have to repeat, but what's that last leg, right, that they may need? And how can we partner with community colleges or universities to help bridge that educational gap? How can we partner with service providers that have access to employers, right, so that we can start to engage those employers when people are licensed to be able to actually get work, right, like, which is the goal of all of this. So I think people working together is really key, and collaboration is the way to address these structural issues. And I think the last piece I was going to mention on the mentoring question, I think absolutely we are very eager to hear from you about your similar group mentoring program. I think there's always lots of knowledge and best practices to be shared, as well as just maybe even just walking through some of that curriculum. With regards to the accessibility, I think that's really a key piece. I think that many of the groups that we've worked with have had to consider when thinking about who is best suited to be a mentee. Obviously, where there's opportunities to provide bus passes, right? Things like that to be able to attend in-person meetings. I know I did some of theirs online as well. So I think there's accessibility is a consideration. And I think really identifying mentees who are ready to engage in the process and can in fact have the, whether if it's virtual, that digital accessibility to be able to do that, or physical to be able to go to the place and provide the supports that we can.
Thank you. You hit that part about the partnerships, because really any regulation that can happen will not help, because it's every country educates differently, right? And you have different training. So to making that up is so important. So I'm glad you mentioned it. Thank you. Anyone else? Any other question? Great. We're actually pretty good time. 2 minutes to the end. So.
Hi, I'm actually a Central New York native. So the data about Central New York and the immigrant population was of particular interest to me. And so I was just wondering, in what areas did the data indicate that they were failing or lagging behind some of the other communities in New York State?
To clarify the question, like in what areas, in what cities in New York City, New York State? Central New York. Actually, we don't have specific data. Like I couldn't find the specific data on the regions of like New York State. That's why we only have the access to numbers that are just by state. And some cities have their own numbers and organizations has their own numbers, but there's no certain data on like the particular regions and particular cities. Yeah.
Yes, it's Jisang, I wanted to just bring the bad news that Central New York is dead last, is number 10 when it comes to integrating immigrant women of color and immigrant foreign-born of color. They're number 10 in the state. So not doing very well. I would really refer you to the poster over there on this side that measures the integration ranking of regions based on the outcomes for foreign-born of color and foreign-born women of color. You're gonna see that.
Yeah, no.
While he sets that up, I want to make a comment. Unfortunately, on data, it's a worldwide issue, right? To be able to have information on where immigrants really are and how long they've settled. So this is an amazing achievement to be able to have a flow and see from years and even evaluate the integration within census data, right? But knowing, if you think of the immigrant community, how much we move, and it's hard to know where exactly they're going, and especially in a world where they're hiding many of them and trying not to share with state government or local government who they are and where they are. It's always, the picture is never going to be comprehensive. And data is an issue discussed from the UN to the local level, everybody asking for numbers. It really is one of the hardest areas for the many reasons, right? And one is that fear of coming and saying, I'm here, I live here, this is how I came, even after they've gained the path of security. So were you able to?
So if we go here, so this is the standardized score that we created based on the 7 major economic outcomes. And when we go to county, central New York, so we're missing some data here, but I mean this one, Foster, race and gender, yes. Yep. Yes. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Yep. So based on the index score, we calculate. And it only speaks for 2021. So yeah, yeah.
Well, we're at time. I think we did pretty good considering some of our difficulties. So thank you so much for your patience, everybody. I found myself very stimulating and fruitful, and I want to thank the Institute, thank Dina as well, and thank the presenters for a great job and for including me and allowing me to be the moderator of this table and hearing also some of your questions. They come back to us as we implement our own work at the ONA. So thank you so much. I think we will have access to the contact information, the PowerPoints, once you've registered, right, Dina? At the very end, it'll be shared. Yeah. We live forever. So thank you so much again. Have a nice rest of your day. You want me still standing here? And then we'll come back for my question.